Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 12 quarterback starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about some news around the National Football League in terms of Thursday night football. A lot of information relying on whether or not guys like Will Fuller or potentially T.Y. Hilton will be playing tonight, so we'll talk about that. Then after that, we're going to talk about quarterbacks and their matchups going into Week 12 of the fantasy football season, and then my top 16 quarterback rankings on the week. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Hey guys, how's it going? All right, hope everyone's doing really well. All right, so we're talking about the quarterback position, but before we get into that, let's talk about Thursday night football. We have a matchup between the Indianapolis Colts and the Texans, both coming off of short weeks and both coming off of very different Sundays, right? The Indianapolis Colts blew out the Jacksonville Jaguars, had a very substantial win there, something that gets them back on track, especially with Jacoby Brissett coming back. And then on the other side of the football, we have Deshaun Watson, who struggled heavily against the Baltimore Ravens, another AFC contender that absolutely just put the pedal to the metal, destroyed them in Baltimore, and really there was just no sign of life from the Texans offense in that game. Now, where we currently stand with Will Fuller and or T.Y. Hilton. As of right now, there will be an indication, probably an hour and a half before the game, saying whether they are active or not. As of right now, where I'm recording this video, that has not been stated. But what I have heard from the side of the Indianapolis Colts is that the Colts are not worried about whether or not T.Y. Hilton plays. They're okay without him playing this week. They know it's a short week, and they don't want to force back his participation, and they don't want to hurry up his recovery process and his rehab and all that jazz. So they are perfectly fine not playing him. Now, from what T.Y. Hilton says, he said he's full ready. He's good to go this week. So we'll see an indication in a couple hours on whether or not he's active. Where am I trending towards? I'm probably thinking that they won't let him play. Hopefully he does play. If he does play, he's a top 12 wide receiver because the secondary of the Houston Texans has been pretty beat up this season. They already have a couple guys already indicated out this week. So as of right now, I think it's a really good matchup for a guy like T.Y. Hilton. Should be a nice, higher scoring matchup between the two teams. So I'm leaning towards hopefully he plays. If not, no big deal. The next best top wide receiver for that team is probably Zach Pascal. But is that a great play? It just depends because he doesn't really get too many targets. Obviously we want to rely upon guys like Eric Ebron if in fact T.Y. Hilton's out because he'd get a little bit of a boost, and maybe even Jack Doyle at the tight end position. But we'll talk about tight ends a little bit later today. Now on the other side of the football, when we talk about Will Fuller at least is a little bit more ahead of T.Y. Hilton. Will Fuller was limitedly participating in practice last week. So in my opinion, I think if we're trending in the right direction and we've already gotten Will Fuller back, he's kind of similar to T.Y. Hilton where he's been out with this injury for last 3+ weeks. Hopefully he plays. Similar to them, I'm probably thinking that the Texans don't want to rush him back. They want to make a playoff run, and they know that they can probably sneak in as a wild card or potentially even win this division if they can pick up another win here tonight. But as of right now, him and T.Y. Hilton, they're pretty much in that same pace or in that same category of where it's questionable. They can play, but will the organization let them play tonight? Hoping they both play. If they both do, should be pretty good players in half PPR plus. T.Y. Hilton always has the deep ball threat. So does Will Fuller. That's what makes them such an intriguing play on a Thursday night game as such, with so many question marks going around the National Football League. So I'm hoping they play. We'll get an indication in a couple hours, but I think they can, and I hope they will. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the quarterback position now. Going into Week 12, let's talk about some matchups before we talk about my top 16 rankings at the position. All right, starting off, the Arizona Cardinals, the easiest matchup for the tight end position and the quarterback position this season. They're on a bye week, so there's no free lunch there. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers give up a bunch of points to opposing quarterbacks. That's absolutely exactly what we want to see, and that's great for a guy like Matt Ryan. Needs to get back on track. The Detroit Lions, Dwayne Haskins not really convinced about that. Moving on, the Miami Dolphins, Baker Mayfield should be a good play this week. Moving on, the Cincinnati Bengals, Mason Rudolph, not really convinced about that either. Some of the lower quarterbacks, sure, we can look at Baker, we can look at Mason Rudolph, and we look at Dwayne Haskins. 100% Baker is better than all of them. I mean, those two guys are inexperienced, and one's getting hit with the helmet, and the other one's, trying to figure it out. So Baker, far better play. And it's Miami. I mean, come on. Moving on, Houston Texans, Jacoby Brissett could have a good game tonight if we see a T.Y. Hilton activated. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then let's go ahead and move on. The Oakland Raiders, Sam Darnold, coming off of a 4-touchdown week, should continue to keep that momentum into this matchup. I expect him to play well. The Atlanta Falcons, Tampa Bay on the other side of that matchup should be a pretty high-scoring affair unless the Atlanta Falcons defense continues to trend in the right direction, continues to rush the pass rush like bats out of hell, and force turnovers like they did last week. There's always a possibility they can get after Jameis Winston. The New York Giants, whether it's Trubisky or Chase Daniels, don't really want to play either of them. And then we have the New York Jets with Derek Carr, who's been pretty good in the last couple of weeks. Let's look at the more tougher matchups going into Week 12. The Carolina Panthers. I don't think that's going to really affect Drew Brees. The reason that quarterbacks don't score much against the Carolina Panthers is because typically the running back position is running all over them and just on the goal line, in the red zone, dominating and scoring. So I still expect Drew Brees to be fantastic. Him and Michael Thomas, Ted getting more usage, and then also Jared Cook continues to see that 10-point streamline, which is absolutely perfect. Should be great. Also, you're going to pass the ball to Kamara 12 times a game out of the backfield. That's beautiful. That's exactly what we want to see. That's going to lead to touchdowns as well and help for a quarterback like Drew Brees. Moving on, the Green Bay Packers against Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo in the last couple of weeks has been on fire. Now, what it's trending towards is a lot of injuries in that lineup. We have Breida potentially missing, Kittle potentially missing, and then also even Sanders potentially missing in a matchup that should be like an NFC championship precursor to see where these teams really stack up against one another. So it's going to be tough, but we'll see. The Dallas Cowboys against quarterback Tom Brady's been struggling as of this past week. Can the Dallas Cowboys do similar things that the Philadelphia Eagles did last week in Foxborough? We'll have to wait and see. Then we have the Los Angeles Chargers on a bye week. The Baltimore Ravens taking on Jared Goff. Free points. If you have the Baltimore Ravens defense, expect a pick six to say the least. That's at least what I expect. Then we get the Chicago Bears versus a quarterback like Daniel Jones. There's always a potential that Daniel Jones could take advantage of this matchup, but he's going to really have to rely upon a guy like Saquon Barkley to help him out, open up some play action. We've got the Denver Broncos. Denver's a little tricky. They're pretty good against quarterbacks, but if we can get some Josh Allen to look a little bit like Kirk Cousins last week, then maybe we have ourselves a pretty good performance there, which I'm kind of expecting. And then speaking of the Buffalo Bills, they also don't give up many points to the quarterback position. It's probably, everyone's kind of anticipating a heavy defensive and running matchup. I don't expect that. I expect teams to pass the ball heavily in this game. All right, moving on to San Francisco 49ers playing against Aaron Rodgers. Again, that precursor of an NFC Championship-esque kind of game. And then we have the New England Patriots against Dak Prescott. All right, let's go to move on. Let's talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings on the week. Starting off with my number one on the week, Lamar Jackson. No, it's not a surprise. Okay, what are we doing? All right, Lamar Jackson. As good of a season as he's having, Russell Wilson is not too far behind in terms of total fantasy points and all the stats. But, turning a team, like we've seen Russell Wilson have incredible years. He doesn't get the credit for it, but having a guy like Lamar Jackson run for 781 yards in 10 weeks is insane. What the funny thing is? Last season, he averaged just about 70 rushing yards. It was 69 point something rushing yards per game. He's increased that average from last season in the 7 games that he started in the back end of the season. He's looking fantastic. As a quarterback that has the ability to throw the ball as well as he has as of late, and on top of it, be able to run the ball, especially in the red zone. It's very underrated, the amount of rushing attempts that he has in the red zone. In fact, this season, he has 22 red zone rushing attempts, which is number 12 amongst all players in the NFL. Behind 11 running backs, he is the 12th guy. With 22 rushing attempts for 4 rushing touchdowns, 4 of his 6. So again, these are some underrated stats that make a huge difference. And I think playing against a defense like the LA Rams, sure, it might not be the easiest thing against some of these better players, Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, but Lamar Jackson's been on fire. He's going to continue to play well, and I expect him to be the number 1 quarterback on the week. All right, so I just got a little report, so let's talk about this. The Colts are expecting Jonathan Williams to be the starter tonight. Significant moment. Okay. whatever. Moving on. Let's talk about my number 2 quarterback on the week, Matt Ryan. Now, Matt Ryan is the number 2 quarterback this week because of the matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay's secondary has been terrible. There is a reason I had Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley so high this week in my ranking. It's mainly because there is no Devontae Freeman. There is no Austin Hooper in the lineup this week. It is going to be the trifecta of Ryan passing to Julio and Calvin Ridley, and I think those 3 are going to be key players this week in fantasy lineups that determine whether or not you can perhaps make the fantasy playoffs. These are guys that should be able to carry this week, and I expect him to have a pretty good week. Now, in the last couple weeks, hasn't been great. He's still dealing with that ankle injury, and in the last 2 weeks, only 3 passing touchdowns total. That's not great, but at least last week we saw him throw the ball more. And the thing is, in the 2 games that they've played this season, they've dominated heavily. The 2 games after the bye week this season, they've dominated heavily. They beat the crap out of the New Orleans Saints. Was it 26-9? And then this past week, they won 29-3. Right? If in fact the Tampa Bay Buccaneers come out and are more competitive, Matt Ryan will be more forced to let the ball go out of his hands. Also, it's going to be a little bit tougher to run the ball against the Tampa Bay defense. So I expect Matt Ryan to throw the ball heavily, and I expect him to be a good quarterback this week. He's my number 2. Moving on. Russell Wilson at number 3, no surprise. Russell Wilson takes on the Philadelphia Eagles defense that, yes, they put up a fight last week, but Russell Wilson, this offense, it's a different animal. I think as of right now, what can we expect to see? To be honest, 2 to 3 touchdowns probably. If in fact Chris Carson is to struggle on the ground, I expect Chris Carson to be good. And honestly, that's only going to help this offense. It's going to help them chug down the field and put some points on the board. And I think Russell Wilson, coming off the bye week, refreshed, ready to go, needs another good win in the NFC in order to make sure that they are in that wild card, perhaps even win their division potential. As of right now, they're looking for a first-round bye, and they're trying to beat or at least tie the record of the San Francisco 49ers. So I expect him to have a good week here. He's my number 3. All right, moving on. Again, he has so many weapons. Gordon, Lockett, Metcalf, Carson. They don't even use Penny. They don't have to. And they have Jacob Hollister as their tight end. They're good to go. Moving on. Number 4, Deshaun Watson playing on Thursday night against the Indianapolis Colts. Deshaun Watson has typically had decent games against them, but when I say decent, sometimes he disappears, sometimes he's decent. Decent as in, maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns. Maybe he runs for a couple of yards. But this is the way I see it. Deshaun Watson has been a pretty good quarterback this year. In comparison to, some of these games, doesn't have great performances. There are games that he'll just disappear, just like last week, and score single-digit fantasy points. That's not exciting. And then there are games where he'll just throw, a couple interceptions, and it'll kill his value. But I do think this week, after such a terrible performance on Sunday, they really have to flip the script. They really have to attack this defense, and they have to really, set the tempo early on in this game. At home, they can't play from behind. Deshaun Watson, I think there's a stat that he's never won a game in which he's losing at halftime. They have to set the tempo, and they have to come out hot, and I expect them to do so. Obviously, that little pass interference call last game kind of dictated the early half of that matchup, but I think, you can't rely upon that kind of thing. You have to come out and you have to make plays, and I think they'll be able to do that this week. Deshaun Watson is my number 4. Moving on to number 5, Drew Brees. Like I was mentioning earlier, the Carolina Panthers are pretty good against quarterbacks, but again, Drew Brees has been, he's been getting back into his rhythm. As of right now, last week had a very easy matchup against Tampa Bay. Hopefully he can continue that momentum. He is one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League, and he has the best wide receiver on roster with him. They're getting Alvin Kamara more implemented. Jared Cook's finally finding himself. They're getting back to what we anticipated this team to look like. And now that we've gotten here, he plays another NFC South contender. And as of right now, it looks like they're going to blow out the Carolina Panthers. Kyle Allen isn't playing well. It's just going to lead to more opportunities for Drew Brees, and I expect him to be very good this week. He's my number 5 quarterback. Moving on to number 6. I thought about this one for a while because the San Francisco defense is no joke. But Aaron Rodgers is going to sit him number 6 this week. Why? Because I expect Aaron Rodgers to come out and step up to the matchup and play up to this defense and really get after them and try to dominate. There's a reason why I have a guy like Devontae Adams at the number 4 wide receiver spot this week is because I believe in Aaron Rodgers to get the job done with him, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, Devontae Adams. Those 4 are the key to this offense. Obviously, if you get other guys implemented, Marquez Valdez-Scantling hasn't caught a ball in like 4 weeks or something like that. It's 2.5. But Jimmy Graham, if you get him more involved, it only leads to success. Hopefully they can go back, look at exactly what the Seattle Seahawks were able to do, see what the Cardinals were able to do against that defense, attack those key points, and really exploit this defense. Hopefully it's an exciting matchup. I expect Aaron Rodgers to be good. Moving on, number 7, Jameis Winston playing against Matt Ryan. Jameis Winston makes mistakes. He throws interceptions, but at least he comes back and he throws touchdowns to kind of even up the score. Last week wasn't pretty. They looked frazzled. They look, it's hard to tell what's going on in Jameis Winston's mind at times. He just throws terrible. It's just the decision making, and he's always had this terrible decision making. Now, whether or not he comes back out, throws 2 touchdowns, and kind of alleviates or gets rid of all those negative points, sure, he kind of does. He'll balance out. That's why we have Jameis here, because no matter how many mistakes he makes, he still somehow manages to surpass 300. He's had 300 plus passing yards in each of the last 5 weeks. Sure, he turns over the ball, but if you can get a game in which he at least has 2+ touchdowns, you're not going to have to worry about those turnovers, and he'll be perfectly fine. I have Jameis Winston as my number 7. Moving on to number 8, Dak Prescott. Now, this might be a little bit shocking. I understand they play against New England, but we have to put this into account. Dak Prescott in the last couple weeks has been they've relied upon him to dominate defenses. In the last 3 weeks, 3 touchdowns each game through the air. In the last 2 weeks, 397 passing yards, 444 passing yards. This is a guy that is very comfortable in the pocket, has been playing out of his mind, to be honest, throwing the ball 46 times each of the last 2 weeks. I think that's what they're going to have to do. I don't know if Zeke's going to be able to step up to the game. Hopefully he will, and hopefully he can make some plays. But I think Dak Prescott is whether or not this team wins or loses. And even if they go down early, I think Dak Prescott, like we've seen earlier in this season, especially against the Green Bay Packers, even if he makes a mistake, he comes back out and he attacks again. Similar like Jameis Winston, he attacks again, he makes plays, he gets you back in the game fantasy-wise. I expect him to have a good week. He's my number 8 quarterback. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my 9 through 16 for 2 days video on week 12 for the quarterback position. Starting off with number 9, Jimmy Garoppolo. Because I don't expect all of his wide receivers to be out. I expect Emmanuel Sanders to play. I expect Deebo Samuel to play. And I honestly expect George Kittle to play. Matt Breida, give or take, I don't really care. So I expect all of his pieces to play. If in fact they do, that's absolutely fantastic. Because in the last couple weeks, he's been he's been good against the Cardinals. Let's put it that way. Against the against the Seattle Seahawks wasn't fantastic. In fact, 50% completion percentage, threw an interception, didn't look great. But hopefully we can see this guy turn it around. They're going to have to rely upon him to make plays. He's going to have to throw the ball 45 plus times this week. Because if you want to compete with this team and you cannot run the ball with a Tevin Coleman, well, you're shit out of luck. You got to pass. Because I expect this to be a little bit higher scoring. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to have a lot to take care of, and hopefully he can step up to the challenge. He's my number 9 on the week. Moving on to number 10, Baker Mayfield playing against the Miami Dolphins. Now, I don't have Baker a little bit higher because I expect Nick Chubb and perhaps even Kareem Hunt to both have rushing touchdowns this game. I expect them to blow out the Miami Dolphins. Sure, Jarvis Landry will get his, so will Odell Beckham, and I'm hoping both of them at least score a touchdown apiece. Now, Baker Mayfield, 100%, 1,000% perhaps, has the upside of throwing a 4-touchdown game and being like a number 2 quarterback on the week. Maybe even number 1 because of the matchup. But as of right now, I expect them to run the ball heavily, and I expect them at least get a good amount of yards and touchdowns on the ground, which will kind of take away from him. That's why he sits at 10, but a fantastic pickup and play this week. Moving on, number 11, Sam Darnold. Again, like I mentioned, Sam Darnold's coming off of a very big performance this past week, having 4 passing touchdowns, and in the last couple weeks has looked better. The week before had 2 total touchdowns, 1 on the ground, 1 through the air, and he's kind of getting back on track. Similar to what they did last season in the fantasy playoffs, they've kind of found themselves. He's finding his favorite targets, Ryan Griffin, Jamison Crowder, Le'Veon Bell, and they're really getting after defenses, and they're not good defenses either. So it's easier for him to play against Washington, Miami, the New York Giants, Oakland Raiders, Cincinnati, Miami again. These are easy matchups, and I think he'll be perfectly fine this week as my number 11 quarterback on the week. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my number 12, Josh Allen. Now, you may be thinking, why is Josh Allen somehow ahead of Tom Brady? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Josh Allen's been incredible. Josh Allen in the last couple weeks has had 2 touchdowns in the last 6 games. 2 touchdowns in the last 6 games. That's really good, minimum. So as of right now, what I'm thinking with Josh Allen, how good he's been as of right now, I mean, how can I expect him not to play well against Denver? Sure, Denver's got a good defense, but this guy can run the ball. He can get the ball out of his hands over the top of a defense with John Brown. He'll find guys underneath. Sure, he doesn't have as many weapons as other quarterbacks do, but he's a playmaker, and he honestly is a pretty good fantasy quarterback. And in the last couple weeks here, has been incredible. We expected him to be good in this stretch, but even prior to that, earlier in the season, I mean, he's had a really easy schedule. Goodness, this is a real test. Outside of that New England Patriots game, this is a real test, and I'm willing to put Josh Allen in my lineup for this test. Moving on, Tom Brady. Tom. Here's my issue. Mohamed Sanu's not going to play this week. Edelman will be there. Philip Dorsett's still questionable. Jacoby Myers might do something. They don't have a tight end. And I'm hoping they run the ball. A lot of people were shocked on Tuesday to hear that Andrew had Sony Michel as a top 12 quarterback. Some of you sitting here waiting for me to be wrong. Some of you sitting here waiting for me, let's just see how, where it goes. And let's just see how it goes. Without Mohamed Sanu, without really much of a receiving core to help him out, and supposedly it's an ankle injury that might hold out Sanu for a couple weeks, quote unquote. I think Tom Brady's he might struggle this week. I think he might. This Dallas defense, they are susceptible to getting run up the middle. But in the passing game, they've been pretty solid. So as of right now, I know Jeff Driscoll looked good. Okay, relax. But as of right now, there's not a lot of weapons for Brady. Could be tough for him. I expect him to be a good quarterback, but he's my number 13 on the week. Moving on, Derek Carr is my number 14 on the week playing against the New York Jets. Again, Derek Carr's been pretty good. Rushing touchdown last week, passing touchdown. This guy is he probably will score 2 touchdowns this week. He'll be a solid play. I'm perfectly fine with that, but that's pretty much his upside. 3 touchdowns, I'm asking for a little too much. 2 touchdowns, probably can get the job done there easily. Score 2 touchdowns, get a bunch of work on the ground with Josh Jacobs, and they'll be done. They win this game. All right, moving on. Ryan Tannehill is my number 15. Ryan Tannehill has been probably one of the sneakiest and/or one of the best quarterbacks in the last couple of weeks prior to his bye week. I mean, looking at his points. Oh, man. In 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, 23, 25, 25, 23. The guy's been really good. I mean, incredible to an extent. 2+ touchdowns every single week. Sure, he might have a problem turning over the ball at times, but those are only against tougher matchups. And I think Jacksonville, from what I saw Jacoby Brissett do, the running game do, Derek Henry will probably take care of that on the ground. I think Ryan Tannehill, probably another good quarterback play this week. Moving on, the last quarterback I wanted to mention, we have Carson Wentz playing against the Seattle Seahawks. I expect the Seattle Seahawks defense not to be as good as they were against like the San Francisco 49ers. That was a weird game for Garoppolo. I expect Carson Wentz to somehow figure it out, and I think he might be able to pass the ball to his trusty tight ends, get it done. Outside of Carson Wentz, who else could I have had here? Perhaps Jacoby Brissett if T.Y. Hilton plays, or maybe even I'm trying to look at this week's schedule because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Jeff Driscoll playing against the Washington Redskins. Those are the 2 guys that I would have considered putting here. But right now, I'm kind of feeling Wentz. I understand last week wasn't the best week for a guy like Carson Wentz, but he still got a touchdown. Still looked decent. But 50% passing completion percentage, that happens when you play against New England. I don't think that's going to happen against Seattle. Seattle's defense could be taken advantage of, and hopefully Wentz is the guy to do it. He's my number 16. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Not tomorrow, but later today, tight end video. We'll talk about tight ends. And until then, hopefully you go check that out. I'll see you. Good luck on this week's matchups. Let's see how this Thursday night game goes. And until then, we'll see you. Peace.